and welcome to Our People, the podcast where we give space for Holdeman stories. We focus on hope, healing, and inspiration. Connection, consciousness, and love are the driving motivations for this project. Remember to have grace for those who have chosen to speak out and share their experience. Please enjoy the story you will hear today. Welcome to Our People. We're here today with Cam Isaac, and we are really looking forward to hear from him and see what he has to share with us. I'm here with Amanda, and I think we're ready for Cam to go ahead and introduce himself.
Yeah, my name is Cam Isaac. I'm 43 years old, live in northern Alberta, Canada. I want to approach this primarily as soul. I am a soul, as is each of us, and that is my primary identity, that I am a being of love and light. That's my identity before any other labels we could apply to me, like Holdeman, right? That's what we're talking about here. So I was born and raised in Crooked Creek, Alberta. It's a congregation that has, it's probably 80, 90 years old, something like that. My grandfather was actually a homesteader in that area. So he was one of the brave souls who ventured north in search of a better life. And he actually cleared his first field by chopping trees with an axe. And my family still farms that same ground. There is some pride in the heritage of our background there. And that's where my roots are. And I still live within an hour there. And my family, namely my brother, still is farming that land. So it's a little bit about who I am. I'm 43 years old. So I'm approaching second half of life. I've lived here most of my life. And as a child, I'm the oldest of four kids. And so as a child, I was born to young, idealistic parents. It's a common experience for oldest child. I learned quite quickly to wear the mask of good boy as a way to gain the approval and acceptance of others, right? That was a lot of my journey through childhood, teenage years, young adulthood. I was always the good boy. I didn't ruffle too many feathers and generally towed the line. I have a really amazing family. I do want to say that. I have good parents, good siblings, and still to this day have good relationships with all of them, which I'm very grateful for. Yes, there has been some rough patches, especially around the time when I was leaving the faith tradition we were raised in. But I have good parents. I was raised in a good home. I was taught good values, and I know that my parents were doing the best they can, the best they could with what they knew. And I would actually say that my family was one. Every social organization has a bit of a hierarchy, right? And I would say that my family was a little higher up on the totem pole, well thought of, well liked, and I was the oldest child. I'm also a very tall person. I've always been tall. So I recognize that I had a lot of privilege even within the community I was raised in, young and growing up. I was generally well liked, and I learned to wear that mask of good boy quite well. Now, some of the work I've had to do around that in more recent years is I've learned that I also learned how to lie. I learned how to lie to myself and to those around me in order to maintain their acceptance and approval. But like that's a pretty bad character trait to develop. and it requires a lot of work later in life. That's why one of my core values is honesty, because that's been a hard one thing to learn for me, to be honest, first and foremost with myself. And that honesty is what has really driven most of the change, pretty much all of the change in my life, is that commitment to honesty, to radical honesty. But yeah, I was baptized into the Holdeman Church at 13. I think that's a fairly common age, especially for a good boy like myself. And I remember that feeling of, I would almost call it euphoria, that now I was fully accepted. I belonged. This group was me. It embraced me, right? And so for me, myself, I recall many good feelings around that time of having this conversion experience and committing my life to God, to this church I'd been raised in, to these people, and being baptized, joining this church, was all an experience that I still associate with good feelings, because that is how I experienced it. So like I touched on before, I developed this pattern of being dishonest. And I did it to hide my true self and to look good on the surface. And from this vantage point, where I'm at now, a lot of the things I was being dishonest about seem quite trivial and ridiculous, right? But it was my life at the time, and it was all I knew. And I'm someone who loves music. I have always had this great love of music my whole life. And so for me, that was one of the first things, right? Was music. How do I get my hands on music? And, I figured out a way, very resourceful, right? I figured out a way to get that first Walkman, whatever it was, hide it under my bed. And, I would stay awake late into the night listening to music. And that was my happy place. However, I always knew that it was considered wrong. And so it was a continual cycle of doing what I wanted to do, knowing it was wrong, then getting rid of it, confessing my supposed sins, right? And then eventually going back to it because it's so awesome. And again and again and again through my teenage years. And that's just one example of many different things, right? But it developed character traits within me. That's what I want to highlight. It developed character traits within me that took a lot of effort to correct later in life. But I enjoyed my teenage years. Lots of good social activities, many friends, travel's a big one within this culture we were raised in, right? And I did have the opportunity to travel quite a bit. I really enjoyed that. One of my favorite actually experiences was going to the young men's preparatory class. I went to North Carolina for that. Made a big road trip out of it with 3 other friends, and we were gone for about a month and just had a party. with the exception of, this preparatory class. It unsettled me because I think it forced me to grapple a little bit for the first time with my beliefs and the beliefs and doctrines of this organization that I was a part of. And I know that at that time I had some questions, some discomfort around everything we were talking about. And I do remember at the end of that 2-week experience, sitting down with this preacher who was guiding this experience and being asked if I would commit. Is that the right word? I forget the
Rededicate or
like it's a dedication, a committal kind of experience. And I remember squirming, but saying yes, because I was well practiced at knowing what to do and say to maintain approval, right? But it's an experience that has stuck with me. Like, that was the first time that I kind of realized not everything is as I portray it to be. I got married young. I was 20 years old, and my wife was 19 when we got married. And that's when I started married life. I'm not sure how common this experience is, but I skipped a critical developmental step because I was living at home with my parents, and then I got married at 20 years old and then stepped into marriage. So I missed this developmental step of learning how to adult alone. And it's funny how life works out, because when you miss a step, it usually comes back around at some point. So it has. But yeah, got married. That was in 2001, and enjoyed life as a young married couple. There's kind of a golden period after marriage where everyone kind of leaves you alone, and you don't have to think too much about your faith, worry too much about it. There's not a lot of expectations placed on you. And several years into marriage, we moved down to southern Alberta, to Pincher Creek. That's the congregation that my wife was from. And I knew that there was some issues there. I knew that there was some politics there, some issues happening. But I knew myself. I was like, I can pretend anything they want me to pretend. I got this. I will live my life and I will portray the image of what whoever is in power wants to see, but I'll do what I want to do and live my life. That's the attitude I had going into it. And so that was a very necessary experience for me, because I believe that life will always present us with opportunities to grow. And often that comes in the form of something disrupting our peace and disrupting our flow. So yeah, we lived there for almost 5 years. And during that time, that congregation went through pretty major upheaval. It went through a lot. There was a preacher there that was wielding a lot of power, and in my opinion, there were a lot of people being hurt by that man. And I started out as an observer, a bystander. I was new to the place, and eventually, I couldn't stay neutral forever. Eventually, I got drug into it, and I would say that experience awakened me to the dark underbelly of the beast. It awakened me to what this organization was actually capable of doing in the hands of power hungry individuals. And so that was the very first step in the journey of awakening. I eventually realized I can't be myself here. And this is BS. Like I love the place, I love the people, but I can't stay living here because something within my spirit, right, was telling me this is wrong. You can't keep doing this. It's gonna diminish. I knew it would diminish me. It would eventually snuff out the light that was within me. So we moved back to northern Alberta, to Crooked Creek in 2009, and so I joined the family farm. I began farming with my parents, my brother, and I did that for 12 years. That was a good experience. It really solidified us as a family unit, I would say. Brought me closer to my younger brother, who was 9 years younger than me. So I'd never really known him as an adult until I started working with him and we were in business together. That was a good experience. So in 2009 is when I began to really start to wrestle with myself, because there were things in my life that I was hiding, that I was being dishonest about, and it really began to bother me. And so 2009 is when I initially started speaking, asking some questions, trying to figure out, who is God? Really, I would say that was one of my first questions, is who is God? And I read the book The Shack by William Paul Young. And for me, that book was a game changer, because something inside of me fundamentally changed when I read that book and allowed it to sink in, because the concept of unconditional love became real. And I would say that book does a really good job of telling the story of unconditional love. And it impacted me greatly. And through that experience, so I began to be honest with people. I began to be honest with my wife, with my family, with the preachers, and I lost my fear. I had this great experience of love coming into my life, and through that experience I lost the fear. And I lost it quite early, I know, compared to many who go through this kind of transition. And I just feel fortunate in that way, that I was able to drop the fear quite soon, and embrace love. That was just the first step on a very long journey. I had no idea at the time, right? But I began to live authentically, and with a commitment to live my life honestly, to be the same person in all situations. And that's not something that happens just overnight. That takes years to really embody living a life of honesty and integrity. I had no intention of leaving the Mennonite church, the Holdeman church. In fact, for a while there, I remember feeling like maybe I'm preacher material, because I feel this huge love for everyone that I've never felt before. And I want to lift people up. I want to help people. And yeah, I have no idea how long that phase was. Maybe a year or two, I don't know. But I kept pursuing honesty and looking at truth, at what I thought was truth, at inconsistencies I saw, which caused me to re-examine things. And actually, I really started digging into the Bible. I became friends with a local guy who was a few years younger than me, and he was not a Mennonite, not a Holdeman, not part of our church. I got to be friends with him, and he took an interest in me, and we had lots of good chats. And he was running a Bible study um, one night a week or whatever in his house, and invited me over, and I joined, and that was quite a pivotal moment as well, because I realized, wow, these guys are Christians too. And it really upset my whole paradigm. It really started to challenge everything about what I believed, because I couldn't deny that these guys who were neighbors in our community, they were very interested in living a Christian life, following the Bible, and loving people around them. And it changed me, because I realized there's no way that I can reconcile these doctrines and beliefs I've been raised with my lived experience of knowing these people, because these are good people, and these are believers. And that's actually what caused me to dig into the Bible deeper and really examine it with more intensity than I ever had before in my life. Um, I started, searching the scriptures, and again, remember, I had lost my fear, so I wasn't shy about discussing it with other people. Hang on, I'm just going to plug my laptop in here.
Sure.
So, quite soon for me, I came up against this one true church doctrine, and I studied it. I tried to understand where this was coming from within the Bible, because the Bible is the holy book, is considered the guidebook for this church I'm part of, right? And so if I dig into it, I realized things were not lining up. And so I kept going. Once you start asking questions and you see inconsistencies, I'm not someone who can go back and just put the blinders on and close my eyes to what I've seen. It's a it's a forward only kind of momentum. You can't go back. I couldn't go back. And so yeah, I distinctly recall sitting in this room of preachers at revival meetings. I think this would have been in 2012, yeah, and telling them, I want to go to communion with you all, but I can't go to communion and say I agree with all of the doctrines of the church, because that's not actually true. And I'm committed to being honest. So, I told them this is my desire. I love this church. I love this people. I want to go to communion, but I'm also not going to lie in order to do so. And that was an eye-opening experience too, because That's not a question you ask. That's not something you voice and carry on with life. That starts you down a one-way street. And so then I got to experience all of that again. And I had no intention of leaving, but yeah, I was stripped of all my roles within the church, my responsibilities. Not allowed to go to communion, of course. But I remember sitting there while everyone else was partaking of the communion service, and I could not, because I had voiced my truth, because I had asked questions that were not to be asked. And I continued moving forward, doing my best to live my life in honesty and integrity, and but to stay within my truth. And yeah, this is something I've learned. That was 2012. So in the last 12 years, I've learned that honesty can take you to really unexpected places. I eventually realized that, yes, this one true church doctrine was a real problem for me. And I believed that it was actually, it was false. This is not actually truth. There are Christians all over the world, and it's very arrogant to think that we are somehow better than all the others. So once I realized that I was being sidelined and pushed away, I began to look at other church options around me, and started attending at another church. My wife and I, we had two young kids at the time, and other churches have communion quite regularly, right? Some do every week, some do once a month, but it's a regular experience, very unlike the experience we had, where maybe once a year everyone could get cleaned up enough to actually qualify for the sheep dip, But it's communion in other churches is a ritual, a practice that is maintained on a regular basis. And so attending another church, they had communion. I looked honestly within myself. Do I want to partake in this? Do I want to partake in what it symbolizes? And the answer was yes. And so I did that. And so it was fall of 2012 when I believe those revivals had been in spring of 2012, when I had been, had the hard conversations and been pushed aside. And so it was fall of that year when they wanted to talk again. And I always took the approach of, sure, hey, I'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. I know others don't have that same approach, and that's fine too. But I will admit, I was playing the I'm right game. And that can be a pretty intense game to play. It's really not something I'm proud of. And if I could do it again, I would do it differently. But I was playing the I'm right game. And so I was happy to sit down with them and let's crack open Bibles and look at this thing. And yeah, I just challenged the preachers directly on these doctrines that I disagreed with my Bible in front of me. But I also told them I have taken communion in another church as well, outside of the Holdeman church. Well, that forced their hand, because there's no way you can sweep that under the rug within the Holdeman church with that one true church doctrine, because that forces that comes directly up against that doctrine, where that's where the rubber meets the road, right? So yeah, I was excommunicated in 2012 along with my wife, and that was the end of my Holdeman church experience. That was a really intense time because I had learned, and I did experience through that time, that my connection to the divine, to God, to source, remained uninterrupted, even when everyone around me thought I was going to hell. But that wasn't actually my experience. And so it was a time of intense feeling as I experienced being at peace within myself in the middle of a storm around me. And that is a theme that I have experienced several times since, and which is actually why the parable of Jesus in the sleeping in the bottom of the boat in the middle of the storm is a powerful story for me, because it demonstrates how it's possible to be so at peace within yourself that it doesn't matter what the storm is around you, you're calm. It's okay. There's a groundedness. You're anchored in yourself. So yeah, that was in 2012, and we began attending church in a nearby city. It was a church that actually had a lot of Mennonite roots, and a lot of Mennonites of other flavors attending it. So there was a lot of common ground felt there, and it was a wonderful stepping stone experience. And eventually we started attending a local church close to where we lived. And again, there was we made a lot of friends, and that was a good experience. So there was, from 2012 to kind of 2016, so there's about 4 years there of transitioning through a couple of different church experiences and making a lot of friends. I also began to observe how that there are people who you run into, you see, and I experienced that within these churches, who they're born there, they live their entire lives there, they die there. It's like they're happy and comfortable exactly where they're at. And here I was passing through, and I couldn't stop moving. I couldn't stop growing and changing and becoming who I am. So it's just a curiosity I observed as I moved through some of these experiences. Like, wow, some people are just cool with being the same person their whole lives, and I seem to be changing. And in 2016, the pastor at the church we were attending, he took a sabbatical, not sure what the word is for it. I think that is the word. Yeah. He took a break for a few months. They were bringing in other speakers, and one other speaker they brought in was very triggering. And it actually snapped me back. It brought me back to my experience growing up Holdeman, where this guy was disparaging. He was disparaging and making fun and cracking jokes at the expense of non-believers. And I was like, oh, this sounds really familiar. This is the kind of thing I always heard growing up, talking about those other people, the so-called Christians, the non-believers, anybody not like us. And that was another point of transition. It caused me to really reflect, and I just said, let's take a break. I don't need to experience this. I don't need to listen to this. And so, yeah, that was 2016. Took a break that is still ongoing. But I was able to step back. And when you're able to step back from something, it takes time, but eventually you're able to see a clearer picture. That's how I describe my experience of walking away from the Holdeman church, is like coming out of a fog. When you're in the fog, it's all you know and you think it's normal. But when you step back and start coming out of the fog and seeing it from a distance, you start seeing things that you had not seen when you were right in it, when you were a part of it. And so, yeah, I got to have that same experience again when I just walked away from church in general and began to look at things again from the outside. I stepped back and began to see things more clearly. So that began a long journey of spiritual change, seeking, and ultimately has really led me to finding myself, figuring out who I am at my core, which I think is one of the most beautiful journeys we can experience in life, is this experience of finding me. Uh, there were many challenging experiences between 2016 and now. You know, I we adopted an older child, which is wonderful. My daughter joining our family from Haiti, and that changed me. It was the most wonderful experience, and she has taught me a lot too, and a lot about myself. But it was a big deal. She was 8 years old, and an older child adoption it's really an all-consuming life experience. And went through a divorce as well. You know, I won't get into that too much because I don't want to tell her story. Her story is hers to tell, my ex-wife. But I will just say, uh, again, honesty can lead you to unexpected places. And her and I still have a really good relationship, and I'm grateful for that. She's a good person, and we are still doing our best to raise our kids together. And we're raising amazing children. They're all teenagers now. But it's a very interesting experience to be 40 years old and go on the first date of your entire life, and to to try to explain that to someone else. How does someone get to 40 years old and never go on a date? And you know, it highlighted for me how absolutely unique my young adult experience was. Again, it was all we knew within the Holdeman church, but to marry someone without really getting to know them is, you know, it's a bit like a game of Russian roulette. You really hope it works out, and some it does work out for some people. Some people can have amazing marriages within the Holdeman church. There's also marriages that are not amazing, but they are committed to staying together because that is very, very core to the beliefs. And that is a hell that I'm thankful I do not need to live. That of living together with someone in a very unhappy life, but being trapped there. But yeah, so I got to experience some of these things later in life, like learning to live alone as an adult, learning to feed myself. Uh, as a guy raised in a very traditional home with traditional gender roles, I've never had to learn how to make food, right? That's a practical one that you have to learn in order to keep living. And so it's a just an interesting process, right? But I've had many healing experiences. I've been I really have spent a lot of time working on myself. In solitude is where you come face to face with yourself, and that's where the most valuable growth work happens. And so that's been my experience for a number of years now. And it's an experience I wouldn't trade for anything, really. It's, I mean, for one thing, I learned just how much of an introvert I really am and how much I enjoy my own company. But I've also learned to know me. And I should fill in the story a little more. So, in the end of 22, I was diagnosed with cancer with stage 4 lymphoma. And within myself, I know how that cancer started. It had started about a year previous to that, but I went through a period of extreme anxiety where I was not listening to what my body was telling me, and that it ended up manifesting in cancer. And so I got to sit by myself for a number of months. I took a whole year off of work and just detached myself from the rat race and sat with myself. And it changed me. I I really examined death, because 3 days after I was diagnosed with cancer, I also got a separate diagnosis from my cardiologist that I had an aneurysm on my aorta right above my heart that could blow at any time. And so I don't believe that was a coincidence. Two major diagnoses like that, 3 days apart. But it was like a sledgehammer blow that set me back, and I had to, and then here I was sitting with myself. And so it caused me to examine death. And it's like, how do I figure out what death is? There's this story I've been told about what death is through my upbringing and everything. But I started to realize there's actually a lot of people who have experienced death. They have physically died, flatlined, and then come back to life. So we actually have this wealth of information of people who have died and come back to tell us about what they experienced. And so I started listening to these stories. There are hundreds and thousands of them. And eventually I realized these stories are really all almost the same. There's a pattern here. You listen to enough of these stories, and it started to change me and my beliefs about death. And through that, I found a lot of peace and a lot of freedom, because I believe that this spirit part of me, this soul part of me, never does die. It is eternal. It always has been. It always will be. And it is simply the body. When the body dies, I transition to another reality. And through that, I was able to drop another layer of fear and really experience a wonderful peace and joy and happiness that I hadn't experienced to that to that level before. And so it was just a wonderful combination, like a perfect storm of health issues forcing me to sit alone, going through this spiritual transformation. And I came out the other side of it with just a great love for life. Like I really felt like I fell in love with life. And that started with really falling in love with myself, learning that I am good inside, contrary to what I was taught when I was being raised, that there was something fundamentally wrong with me. I learned that no, I am an amazing person. I am good inside. I am full of goodness and love. Yes, there are parts of me that need work. Absolutely. And that's the journey I've really been on the last couple of years, is really working on these parts of me. And which is, I believe this is why we're here on earth, is to work on these parts of ourselves. And so it's wonderful to have this freedom to be absolutely and completely me, and this freedom to work on myself. And yes, I've been brought up against my shadow side many times, where I have to acknowledge these dark parts of myself, these dark parts within me, and often dig into how they got there. What were the circumstances and the environment that caused me to learn to be dishonest, for example? Well, I did have to go back to childhood for that one, right? And but I've words kind of fail me here, but I've got to experience this joyous experience of finding me and finding my peace, my happiness, my joy, and losing this fear along the way. So yeah, here I am. I just had heart surgery actually too. 7 weeks ago, went through open heart surgery. So again, I'm having this wonderful experience of sitting with myself. I'm off work right now, but this time is different. This time is really, really good. And so yeah, that's a bit about me. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them, fill in more parts of the story. I will say that, you know, it's 12 years already since I left the Holdeman Church. And I wasn't, like, it was my choice. It was right. I knew what I was doing. It was my choice to leave. So I wouldn't say there was trauma around that. And given the distance from that event and the work I've done on myself since, there's really no emotional charge for me anymore. And I'm grateful for that. I understand that other people have very different experiences from that, and I definitely acknowledge that.
A question I had. You said that you had been committed to honesty. What what do you think it was in yourself that made you commit to that? I guess my thought being, why did you commit to honesty instead of your best friend or someone else? What was it that brought that out, that became the most important thing to you?
Well, I got tired of the cycle. We, whether you're an ex-Holdeman or you're still a Holdeman, we all know what I'm talking about. There's this cycle that comes to a culmination at revival meetings, and where most people at least once a year get honest. And that can be a really good feeling, actually, getting honest, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that feeling of honesty, and I also knew my pattern of going back to a life of hiding and lying. And I got tired of that. Something snapped within me where I said, I'm going to stop living this way. I'm going to be an honest person. I'm going to be the same person all the time. I'm not going to stand up and say, I agree with the doctrines of this church, and then go on living my life as though I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be a man of integrity. Yeah. And this is what was really challenging for me is this percentage may vary in different places and different congregations, but I looked around me at my friends and family and I said, 80 or 90% of you don't believe it either.
Yeah.
So who's going to stand up and say that the emperor has no clothes?
Well, I think the fear of, of the gatekeeper syndrome is what keeps most people quiet. I mean, you lose. So you have so much to lose for speaking out that it's a really, really dangerous position to walk into.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. And that is true. When you leave the Holdeman church, you lose your old life. You lose everything you had, right? Um, I lost a good portion of my friends and family. Not like we will still acknowledge each other, but it's just not the same as it used to be, right? Um, and because your entire social life is tied up within this group, you have to learn how to start life over again, which is, I would argue, an incredible experience. It is full of opportunity. Yes, it's easy to focus on the hard things, the negative things, what could go wrong. But having the opportunity to craft and build a life that you love, that you can be the same person all the time with everyone, where there's no more lying, no more hiding, no more pretending, is really, really incredible. Yes, it can get very lonely at times. Because this change requires a lot of oneself. Like it requires a lot of growth. And there are a lot of people within our society who never do a whole lot of growth, a lot of personal growth, right? So when you really start growing as a person, you don't fit in with just anybody out there either. uh, you got to find your tribe, and that can take a while. For me, that has taken quite a number of years, and the work is worth it. The time spent is worth it.
Absolutely.
I've found that as go ahead there, Amanda.
Just what you gain in what yes, you give up, maybe give up a lot, but what you gain in personal growth and integrity and discovery is just so well worth it.
It is. Yeah, it is. And you, once you do enough work on yourself and become who you are, you start attracting your tribe. You begin to attract people who are supposed to be in your life, people who are good for you, and people who can understand you, who are also on a growth journey as well. And Recently I've been really paying attention to the feeling of peace, because every night now when I go to bed, I have this little practice I do every night when I close my eyes before I go to sleep. I first think of three things that I'm grateful for today, like things today, people I met, places I went, experiences I had today that I'm grateful for. And then I breathe in a breath really deep, fill that breath with all the emotions I've experienced today, and I breathe it all out. I breathe that all out, send it all back to source. And then I lay there with this feeling of peace. And I'm not sure there's any feeling that's more valuable in the world than to be able to close your eyes at night and truly be at peace with yourself and at peace with others. That's what's been a long, hard-fought journey to get to. But to experience it that's heaven. I believe that's heaven.
Oh, absolutely. I honestly, I have said this for years and I believe it, that, heaven and hell, they're not these mystical places. We make them right here on earth. And it's either
Yeah.
one of them. Which one do you want to create? Because you're going to create it no matter what.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
I've lived through hell, and I am experiencing heaven.
That's beautiful. Well, really, you did such a great job covering everything that, I mean, we just really enjoyed your story. Waylon, is there anything you'd like to ask or add?
You like to read a lot, don't you? Or you have done quite a bit of reading.
I like the idea of reading. In practice, it takes some discipline.
Yeah. I remember you talking about some
read,
of some of the things you've read. So you talked about the shack being really instrumental. What other things do you think has helped you get through some of the places to where you're loving yourself like that? Do you think there's anything you've read that helps you with that part of your journey?
That's an interesting question, and really nothing jumps out at me other than the book called The Four Agreements. I'm not sure why that book jumps out at me, but it's one I've read a couple of times, and it's been very impactful to me. Don Miguel Ruiz, I think, is the author. Not sure, but the book is called The Four Agreements. That's been a powerful book to me. Also, the book Conversations with God. That's been a powerful book as well. That book pairs really well with sitting on top of a mountaintop all alone. I like that experience. I spend a few days on top of a mountain every summer just alone and camping up there. And there's no cell service, but the connection is really good. I will say that it's an experience I highly recommend.
Yeah. That's amazing. Okay, well, if you'll stay on.
One thing I wanted to mention about my family is my parents. I know this wasn't easy for them, but when I was excommunicated, they had a choice to make, right? And they chose love over being right. And that decision on their part, I believe, has led to the good relationship we have today. I'm thankful for that. I know not everyone experiences that. But it taught me something, that experience taught me something, that as I go through life as well and interact with other people, choose love over being right. Love is always the answer. It's always the answer. And, you know, another thing I do want to say is that everything I've gone through, my entire, you know, childhood, growing up experience, the whole religious experience I went through, I have arrived at a place where I am grateful for it all. And I'm okay with it. I'm grateful I had all the experiences I had, because it truly has made me the man I am today. It's given me a lot of character, and it's enabled me to embrace authenticity because of everything I've had to go through, right? So yeah, you don't get this awesome by accident.
Right. Takes
Yeah,
work.
that's something I've noticed with several people we've talked to. They said they wouldn't change it for anything, but it took a lot of work.
Yeah.
You know, it's not the easy way.
Yeah, you know, I believe this is the truth in each of our lives, that we may not be able to see the whole path ahead of us, right? Like in 2009, when I picked up that book, The Shack, I had heard about it and I was scared of it. And yet something about it kept calling me. So eventually I went and bought it and started reading it. So that was taking the next right step for me, right? And that taking that first step started me on a journey that I could never ever have anticipated. It's taken me on a wonderful journey, but it also taught me that, yeah, we can never see the end of our journey, but each one of us knows the next right step to take. We have something somewhere in our lives where we know what the next step is for us. And that's a very individual thing, but we know what the next right step is for us. So just simply take it.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think I've said everything that was on my heart. Came into this totally unprepared, but I sometimes surprise myself when I get talking.
Yeah. I always believe that's exactly what's meant to be out there. We'll get out there. So absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for being willing to come on and share your story. And I know it's not easy for everybody, but we really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So, Waylon, you have any last words?
No, I've not really, but it's just been amazing to me, just the few we've done, of how much this just does at humanizing everybody. I mean, I know I've talked to you before, and I think for a lot of us, we just think, well, they just started out and here they are. And it's so amazing to hear these stories, to hear the pain of the when you first broke away, and hear all of that. I think that's exactly what we're looking for here, to bring out the dirt and the hard work of each of these stories. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's easy to get stuck in life, and being stuck is no way to live life. So again, when you take that next right step, there's some movement starts happening.
Yes, we free up energy to keep going.
So yeah, I believe the life is wonderful and magical, and we're here to experience. We're here to experience things. So the less we can live in the past or the future, but be here in the now, the better. Live each day like I had this opportunity, right, to live each day like it was my last. Like the doctor had told me not to go to the gym until I got my heart fixed, but I went anyway, right? And so I got to experience, like I could die. And so you're aware of every like breath, every heartbeat, every interaction with another. And I became alive to life. And I never want to lose that, you know. Life is absolutely incredible when we open our eyes to the magic of it all.
Thank you for listening. It is an honor to connect with our guests, and we wish the best for them as well as our listeners. Remember to like and subscribe for more episodes. Our People can be found on all major podcast platforms as well as YouTube. If you are interested in sharing your story, please contact us at ourpeoplepodcastteam@gmail.com. Thank you.